Hello. Hello out there. So, welcome to the first episode of the Intercultural Insiders show. And my name is John McGraw, and I am the founder of Hyaku Coaching and the host of Intercultural Insiders. So, what I do specifically is I help newcomers and expats feel more confident in their new country in less time and pain. Now, this is the first episode of the Intercultural Insiders podcast, but future weekly episodes will feature guests, of course. But I wanted for this first episode to show a solo experience to basically explain the reasons why I started the podcast and what exactly it is, my intentions for starting this podcast and reasons for the show, and to share my story. So bear with me, because this is, of course, the first time that I'm doing this podcast here. And, well, before we go further on, of course, I'd like to take some questions from the comments. I'll be doing that a little bit later on, but more specifically right now, I'd like to get a sense of who is out there, where you're from. Feel free to add your comments in the chat. I'm not sure. I may be a bit of a delay right now with some technical issues because I'm seeing that I'm showing up on LinkedIn Live and YouTube a little bit later. So I'm not sure if any of you are out there actually hearing me at the moment. But perhaps in a moment, if you start seeing me, you can feel free to write and comment in the chats and let me know where you're from. But in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and let you know a little bit more about me and about the reasons for this show. So I created this show to share the stories of people with intercultural experiences. And through talking with many newcomers and expats, and through my own experiences, I've found that there are often times when we feel isolated or lost because we're in a new culture and we don't understand how things work. Things are feeling different, and we're not sure exactly how to navigate that. And that can lead to a lot of isolation and a lot of pain. So by sharing my stories and those of the future guests, I'm hoping that all of you out there will be enlightened, you'll be entertained, and possibly learn something that could help you, even if it's just the message that you're not alone. And I'm seeing that some of the people are commenting on there. So hi, Liz. And hi, of course, Joseph. Thank you for watching in. So I know Liz is tuning in from the US. And of course, Joseph Petosa, he's the founder of Toronto English School. So of course, he's located in Toronto. And getting back to what I was saying about cultures and about this show, Intercultural Insiders, again, through having the guests that I have lined up in the future, I want to show, of course, that learning about cultures and learning in general is a lifelong journey. And this applies to adapting to other cultures as well. Rather than isolating ourselves, if we open ourselves to new experiences, we can become better versions of ourselves. And when we recognize the similarities and differences between cultures, and it's important to note both of those, similarities and differences, when we're aware of both of those, we can be more cross-culturally competent. So, let me give an example from my own experiences. As some of you may know, I spent several years in Japan, and ESL teacher, English as a second language teacher. And this was my very first time living outside of Canada. Now, when I started and when I was hired by the school, after I did an interview here in Toronto, I was given a simple manual with some details on do's and don'ts and a few things about how to get along with some of your neighbors and with coworkers. That helped a little bit. And of course, I did some research online to find out some details and some tips and tricks because I wanted to be able to get along in this new environment, in this new country. And I felt that I was prepared. But in fact, I really wasn't that prepared because I had some surface details of what to do or what not to do. But when it really came down to it, there was a lot of deep understanding that I didn't have. And on top of that, deep understanding of my own culture and what that meant and how I interacted with other people and how it affected the way I saw things. I'll give you an example of that. There was an experience where I was teaching. This was within the first year of my teaching in Japan. I had a student who I was explaining some details on how to pass the TOEIC test, giving some tips and tricks on how to do that, which, always answer C if you don't know what to do, for example. After giving him all of these instructions and asking him to do all of these steps, I asked him the question, "Do you understand?" He, of course, said yes. So I thought, all right, he understands. We can go ahead and go on with the main part of the lesson. In short time, it became quite clear that he did not understand my instructions. And this was really confusing to me and actually quite frustrating. I thought, well, okay, clearly he doesn't understand that. And so why did he say that he understood this? Some of you may be able to comment on there as well. Well, as I spent more time in the culture, I realized there were a number of factors involved with this. One of them was the sense of, I think, a collective culture, the importance of the collective and the group over the individual. And it seemed that many times students wouldn't want to speak up about any misunderstanding they might have simply because doing so would create difficulties for the teacher or create difficulties for the group. So that was one reason. And another reason along those lines, perhaps standing out, drawing more attention to yourself. Whereas, commonly speaking, in a country like Canada, we would expect a person to speak up about it. So that was one cultural difference. Mind you, it's not only seeing that in that situation that there was a problem with the students' culture that I had to overcome. It's not that at all. In fact, it was also my inability to understand the cultural nuances that made my job more difficult. So I couldn't effectively help the student. If I was more culturally aware at the time, I would have been able to see what was going on with the student and listen deeply beyond the words that he was saying. For example, paying more attention to his body language, noticing that he was sweating a little bit, or the sound of his voice, maybe that there was a bit of a tremor there, because there's a lot of indirect communication, typically speaking, in Japanese culture compared to Canadian culture. Now, understand, I'm not stereotyping. I have met a number of Japanese who are very direct communicators, and people are different. But as we all know, there is cultural tendencies that we need to be aware of. And being aware of those tendencies, not only in other cultures, but our own cultural tendencies, really helps us to be more effective in adapting to other cultures and being a better, more effective person and growing as a person. So I did learn a number of these things on my own, but it was very, to say the least, it was very difficult and it was very stressful. And it took me some time because it would have been good to have someone like a coach to work with, to be able to talk out some things and maybe be able to have someone else listening to me and maybe be able to highlight things that I wasn't aware of myself. So that's, I think, the value of intercultural coaching and also taking that knowledge and being able to grow as a person. And in many cases, not only act effectively in the culture, but you can become a bridge to other cultures and really be able to become more valuable to whatever work situation you're in, whether it's as a teacher of English or as an expatriate on assignment or as a newcomer to Canada. Finding your way here and also helping those from other cultures, your home culture, to adapt and be more successful here. And that's the real value of cross cultural competency and intercultural communication. So I'm seeing a lot of comments here. I'd like to address a lot of that. Okay. Yes, social pressure, I'm noticing. This is a new experiment for me, so I'm going to try and show some comments here. Okay, yes, from Dinesh. Social pressure is another aspect that we need to consider as well in groups, particularly societies that value the collective approach. And yes, also, some students prefer to wait until hearing the whole explanation. I know I do. Yes. Okay. Very good point, Liliana. Yes. So I prefer not to be interrupted. So there can also be an issue of the language barrier as well, taking the time to understand at the end, as opposed to other cultures such as Canadian culture, where you're more likely to possibly interrupt when you don't understand. So those kinds of things can also create misunderstandings as well. Take a look at some of the other comments. Okay. Yes, also the fear of looking bad. And as mentioned, thank you, Liz, lots of times they don't know whether they understand or not. That can also be true as well. Yes. Sometimes there is that lack of understanding, depending on the level of ability. But again, we do want to keep in mind that depending on the culture, there may be a different response and the individuals as well. So, again, as I said earlier, I want to make it clear that doing this doesn't mean that adapting to another culture doesn't mean completely changing yourself to assimilate into the new culture. And I'm stressing this, maybe coming from this, from the approach of being a Canadian. And Canada in particular, and many countries, not just Canada, but I'm speaking as a Canadian, our country thrives on newcomers and the new perspectives that they bring. So we don't necessarily, it's not necessarily to your benefit or to your new home's benefit to completely try and change yourself to become, for example, to become a Canadian. Of course, you can become a Canadian by having citizenship, but it doesn't mean completely changing yourself so that you are identical to someone who was born and raised here. Because you have that different cultural perspective, you can leverage that to your advantage and obviously use the understanding to act as that bridge, but also be able to bring in the perspectives that you have from your own culture. And I've heard this not only just for Canada too, but also speaking as someone who was, of course, a foreigner in Japan. One thing that I heard from many successful people who adapted to the culture is that you can't out Japanese the Japanese, meaning that, of course, you're not going to be able to speak the language as well as they do or understand the cultural nuances as well as they do. But with that, you can have enough awareness of the culture and bring in those strengths that you have from being an outsider in some situations and broadening everyone's understanding of the situation, maybe speaking up more readily where other colleagues might not. It's really taking your new experiences of your new understanding and merging it with your old and becoming a stronger version of yourself. And to do that, you really need to be open to the new experiences. Many people sometimes think that just by living in another country, you will automatically become culturally competent. That's not always true. You have to be open to the experiences. Get outside of your comfort zone. Don't just spend all of your time with other people from your culture. Obviously, you can do that sometimes, but it's really about getting out there, exposing yourself to new experiences, and getting a deeper understanding of them. Okay. Yes. And I'm just going to highlight some of the other comments that have been coming in. Okay. Yes. Paul Duke out in Vancouver. I love that you're sharing your wisdom here, John. Thank you. Thank you so much, Paul, for joining in as well from the West Coast. And Dinesh, yes, there's a bigger need to train operations teams and hiring managers for cross-cultural training. Absolutely. Absolutely. I've heard figures such as by 2050, 50% of Canada's population is going to be made up of people who are born outside of Canada. Toronto is already at that number, but the rest of the country will join that as well. So very good point, Dinesh. And also, yes, one of the unconscious biases that is prevalent is people like people who are like themselves. Again, excellent point. So it's important to be aware of that and step outside your comfort zone, even if it's just to the case of trying some new food, maybe a new experience, talking with people from other cultures, exposing yourself to things that might seem a little uncomfortable at first. But at least if you test it out, you'll know. And you might find something, and you might learn something more about yourself. All right. So, as I've said, in the future, we'll be having some guests. So you won't have to hear me just talking all the time like I am doing here, doing a solo show. But some of the guests that I have coming up have had experiences of being newcomers to Canada or newcomers to the United States, even Canadians going to other countries or working for companies from other nationalities, working sometimes in cross-cultural situations. So it's not only limited to newcomers to Canada. Now, you might wonder why I would bring in so many different experiences from different people. Well, To me, I feel that there is a commonality, as I mentioned before. The idea that we've all of us who have gone outside of our country or working with people from other cultures, we've all gone through that sense of isolation, that feeling that maybe even a sense that we don't belong, or maybe we're judging others. Why do they do this way? Or judging ourselves, why do I feel this way? Losing a sense of competency because not only due to language, which can be an issue as well, but this can even happen in places where we assume that people speak the same language as we do. You can even think about cultural differences between Canada and the UK, for example, or Canada, the United States. Differences may be small, but they are there. And just being able to navigate those differences and being able to adapt to them really makes you a better person as well. Okay. Another comment here I notice as well. Yes. Okay, Mohammed, one needs to step out of the comfort zone and always know the culture around. This is one thing that helps. Absolutely. As well. By the way, feel free to, if you have any questions, to add them in the chat. Again, I'm not sure if there is a delay going on. This is my first time doing it. It feels like there might be a delay on my end, but feel free to add in any questions you may have for me about the upcoming shows, the episodes. I do want to mention that I do have not only episodes of Intercultural Insiders coming up, which is going to be a weekly show, by the way, but I also have some live events. In fact, a live event that's coming up very soon, which I'd like to share with you. So I will be speaking at a live event, actually in person, coming up. The speaking about, in my part, this is in partnership with Brilliant Minds Group, BMG, to get along, to get ahead, Canadian work etiquette and expectations. That's my portion that I'll be speaking through for Brilliant Minds Group, which is an excellent nonprofit organization dedicated to helping newcomers and international students adapt to life here in Canada. That will be at 9:30, starting at 9:30 in the morning in Eastern Time at the Residence Inn by Marriott. I believe that the actual portion that you can attend in person, I believe that's all been sold out. However, it is a hybrid event, so it will also be available online with the link, which I am going to post into the chat as well in just a moment. And you should be able to, there should be tickets. I believe there will be tickets available for that as well still. So I'm going to add that into the chat. So you can register there, and even though you can't attend live, you can certainly attend virtually and find out more about, from me, about how to adapt, what are some of the expectations in the workplace, and of course, hearing from my fellow guest speaker, Murali Murthy, about building your unique personal brand. So I highly recommend coming to it. And it's not just because I'm one of the two people speaking there as well. I think there can be a lot of value for newcomers to Canada looking to adapt to the work culture here. So, yes, okay. And thankfully for Dinesh also mentioning that there are 10 spots available left. Dinesh, I should mention, is the CEO of Brilliant Minds Group. So he knows quite a bit about that and about what's available. So, as I mentioned, this is, of course, the first weekly episode of Intercultural Insiders. But future episodes are going to feature interviews with many people. And I'm very excited by the episodes that are coming up, all of the opportunities of hearing other people's stories and seeing what they've experienced as well, whether they are, as I said, newcomers to Canada or newcomers to other countries, Canadians going to other countries, or Japanese people going to the United States. And all of those experiences, I think, have a commonality. And by watching, you can hopefully learn from them, maybe have a commonality with their experiences, and realize, again, that I want to emphasize that we're not alone. So, it's been a good first episode. It is, of course, been just me talking, but it's a good experience. I'm used to speaking in front of groups, but this is the first time I'm actually running a live show while also monitoring comments and also making sure that the timing is working out. So there's a lot. I really am now getting an appreciation of those who run live shows regularly. Paul Duke, for example, I know, who does a speaking show for focusing on English teacher. I think it's Teacher Paul, I believe, is the name of his show as well. So it's quite the balancing act. But I have to say, I appreciate you coming out here and giving all of your comments as well. And I feel that as this show goes on and builds up momentum, there's going to be a lot of opportunity to hear from many, many fascinating guests. I've already recorded a number of episodes, and I'm eager to share them with you. And so many things. I could just spend the rest of the time just talking about all of the things that I've learned from those interviews. But of course, it's going to be better if you tune in and watch them yourselves. This, of course, will also be available later as a podcast. Details for that will be coming soon. And of course, you can watch the replays on LinkedIn Live and also on YouTube. And I will make this available later on my website, thriveglobally.ca, which I will show here. And again, if you are interested in finding out more about what Hyaku coaching can do for you in helping you feel more confident in your new cultural environment, go to thriveglobally.ca to find out more. And I see that our time is coming up to a close. So I want to thank you all for coming in to watch. Looking forward to seeing you in the future episodes and watching the interviews that I have with future guests. So it's been a great first live experience, and I'm looking forward to going on this journey with you as we learn more about cross-cultural competency and sharing the stories of intercultural insiders. Thank you.